In the mid-1800s, as the rapidly expanding nation called the United States pushed its way to the Pacific Ocean, Swilling's Mills was one of hundreds of tiny communities sprouting up in the parched soil of the American West. Most of those rowdy, untamed towns died off quickly. The citizens of Swilling's Mills wanted their town to endure and prosper, but how could a town with such an inelegant name as Swilling's Mills ever expect to attract new settlers and become a real city? At a town meeting in the Lucky Star Dance Hall, Grover Jeffries, the owner of the town's dry goods emporium, shouted out his thoughts on the town's odd name.
Tarnation and jumping Jehoshaphat, the name of this village should be tarred and feathered and run out of town on the back of a mule.
And thus, Grover Jeffries began a long campaign to change the name of Swilling's Mills and make it the biggest city in the young nation called the United States. This is Melinda Main for Bill Russo's Short Story Theater. Keep listening and learn how Swilling's Mills did become one of the largest cities in the United States. Under a different name, of course. And soon, perhaps before the end of this century, Old Swilling's Mills, under its new handle, may take over the title of America's #1 city. Now back to our story. Storekeeper Grover Jeffries urged his customers to join forces with him in demanding that the horrible name be changed to anything but Swilling's Mills. But he was shouted down by a wrangler named Yancey Grates, who said,
"There's nothing wrong with our town's name. Our village was not named for the 4 dance halls and 16 saloons on Main Street. Or was it named for the drunken swilling of cheap whiskey? It was named for Major Jack Swilling, hero of the Indian Wars, the Civil War, and the great canal builder who founded our fair city, Swilling's Mills."
Another man stepped up to speak. He said, "Yancey Grates is right. You people all know me, I'm Spade Cooley. I've got one of the biggest ranches in the area. And the only reason I've got it is because of the canal that Jack Swilling dug for our town. That canal turned a patch of burned out earth into a thriving village with cool, clear water for everyone. Jack Swilling was a gentleman of the first rank. He was our first postmaster and justice of the peace. And even if he was one of the most eager patrons of the 16 saloons and 4 dance halls, he should never be dishonored by disowning Swilling as our name." Lamont Roebuck, the current sheriff of Swilling's Mills, was not so sure. He walked slowly up to the stage of the Lucky Star Dance Hall. And at first, he seemed to praise Major Jack Swilling. But he concluded his talk with a question that brought a dark cloud to the Major's reputation.
I know that Major Jack Swilling was a visionary. Why, when he saw this area, he felt that it would be the center of a booming farming community, except that it lacked water. His canal building is what made our town wet and what made our town prosperous. But what about his involvement in that murder, the infamous favorite killing?
A few newcomers to the West were unfamiliar with the story of the ill-fated Mr. Favorite, so he explained. He said that, a few years after Major Swilling started the town in 1871, President U.S. Grant gave him a land patent for the area. And it was decided to hold an election for the first sheriff. Jack Swilling did not run, and may not have been involved, but the fact is, the election was tainted. There were 3 candidates: Jim Favorite, Tom Barnum, and John Kenworth. Favorite and Kenworth were the leading contenders for the job. One of the two heard that the other guy was saying that if he lost, he had been guaranteed the job of deputy. This led to a falling out between Favorite and Kenworth. The argument was concluded at dawn, in a bloody gunfight. When the gunsmoke cleared, the crowd could see Kenworth walking away from Favorite, who was breathing his last after being shot in the chest. Favorite soon fell dead, and Kenworth fell out of the race. His withdrawal left Tom Barnum as the only candidate, and thus, Tom Barnum became the first sheriff of Swilling's Mills. The Lucky Star dance hall fell silent as storekeeper Grover Jeffries got up from his seat in the audience and walked to the front of the hall, dragging his chair along behind him. Trying to look as official as possible, he took his apron off, straightened his string tie, and put on a black suit jacket of the latest back east style. Jeffries was a large man for the times, close to 5'9" tall. His legendary appetite had pushed his weight somewhere north of 250. Seeing him climb clumsily upon his chair, and stand up on it, so that everybody in the hall could see him, reminded some people of watching a burly grizzly bear, attempting to climb a cottonwood tree, to make a lunch out of a dog that was up the tree.
Citizens of Swilling's Mills, Godfrey Daniels, how I hate that name. I stand before you today to implore you to vote to give our town new life. And we can only have new life in this town if we have a new name.
After brushing aside a wave of coarse black hair that had partially covered his eyes, Grover Jeffries stroked his long beard for a moment, while he made sure he had the attention of every man in the room. From high atop his chair, that groaned loudly from his excessive bulk, the hefty storekeeper continued.
I don't want to speak badly of our founder. The sheriff has already told you that Jack Swilling may have been involved in the killing of Jim Favorite. Godfrey Daniels, I don't want to do it, but it's my duty to tell you now about another incident. Yeah. You betcha. Another blot upon the name of Jack Swilling. And remember, my friends, a blot upon the name of Jack Swilling is equally a blot upon the name of our fair city, Swilling's Mills.
With his stubby hand, storekeeper Grover Jeffries reached into his jacket and withdrew a newspaper clipping from an interior pocket.
Gentlemen, as I have stated, I personally do not want to say anything negative about Jack Swilling, but I shall quote the following story that I have right here, and it's from our town's newspaper. As everybody knows, our newspaper is an unimpeachable source of news. Well, this is what it says. I quote, "The day passed off quietly to the relief of all after the shooting. But after dark, Jack Swilling allowed his angry feelings to get the best of him. He wasn't happy at the outcome of the election, and he narrowly escaped a lynching. He had left the polls and was up at the old house of Dennis and Murphy when a Mexican, who had not voted the way Jack wanted, came along on horseback. The Mexican got off his horse, and Jack, who was standing a little distance from him, deliberately pulled a double-barreled shotgun on him and lodged the contents in his stomach. The gun was fortunately loaded with birdshot, and they did not penetrate the vital parts. The story continues. Andy and Jake Starr, who was still at the polls, heard that shot, and suspecting some foul play, they immediately spurred their horses to that direction. Just as they reached the outskirts of town, they saw in the moonlight on the left side of the road the gleam of a gun barrel pointed right at them. After some parleying, they found it to be the Mexican who had just been shot. And he told them he was laying for Jack Swilling. Jake Starr, feeling that there might be more trouble, took the Mexican down to his house and told him to lock himself in and shoot the first man who came through the door. The committee of citizens, headed by Jake and Andy Starr, immediately confronted Jack Swilling, and they told him that the very next lawless act would result in him dying like a dog without a judge or a jury. That's the end of the story. It's printed many years ago in our local newspaper. Gentlemen, in conclusion, I say, you heard it right there from the newspaper. There can be no doubt as to the veracity of this story. So I hope that you will join me now in riding this name of Swilling Mills out of town on the back of a mule, and let's craft a more fitting title for our fair city.
And that is also the end of our tale for today, on Bill Russo's Short Story Theater. Almost. But not quite. The men that were gathered in the Lucky Star dance hall that day, agreed generally that they didn't like Swilling's Mills for a name. But they were unable to come up with an alternative. The debate of the fate of the town's moniker continued for some years. The village finally did get a change of name, and grew quickly into a city. And the city bloomed into a megalopolis. Today it is one of the largest cities in the entire United States of North America. Its new name? Many sources say that one of Jack Swilling's old pals, Lord Darrell Dupa, came up with it. He suggested the name Phoenix. It took. And Phoenix, Arizona today, is the 6th largest city in all of the 50 states. It is also the largest U.S. state capital. And with 1.4 million people, it is the only one, with a population over 1 million. There are some people who say that Swilling's Mills, Phoenix, will soon become the biggest city in America. Will it happen? Time. And only time will tell.
Time. And speaking of time, our time is up for today. This is Basil Nightingale. Our thanks to Melinda Main, who narrated today's story. This is our first show of Season 3 on Short Story Theatre, and Melinda is our newest cast member. We look forward to hearing more from her as the season continues. Today's feature was written by our producer and director, Bill Russo, based on the real-life story of Jack Swilling and the town that was named for him, Swilling's Mills, known today as Phoenix, Arizona. This is our first season with sponsors, and we hope that you will listen to the messages from our sponsors, because they do provide us with a few biscuits and some beans for our supper table. Thanks again, and come back again soon. Won't you?